Ever feel like the world's this giant chessboard
Yeah.
and someone's playing like battleships on the side?
Mm.
That's kind of what we're diving into today, Seapower. We cracked open Basil Germond's Seapower in the postmodern world.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's not just about who's got the biggest fleet anymore.
Yeah, right from the get-go, Germond, he draws this like really important distinction between sea power with a capital S and just, plain old naval power. It's a bit of a brain teaser, but stick with me. It's a good one.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So what's the difference and why should we care?
Well, imagine like naval power as the sharp end of the spear, right?
Okay.
The warships, the submarines, the raw military force.
Okay.
But sea power, that's the whole arm wielding that spear. It's economic influence, control of trade routes, even the cultural impact a nation has through, its maritime activities.
So it's less about like actually sinking ships and more about shaping the world through your connection to the sea.
Exactly.
Right.
Germond calls it a virtuous circle, where a nation's naval strength, economic interests, even its ideas about the sea, they all kind of feed into each other and they create this like powerful force that can really shape global politics.
And this isn't just some like newfangled idea, right? This
Yeah.
virtuous circle, it's been spinning for centuries.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Germond, he takes us all the way back to ancient Greece
Wow.
to show us just how far back this concept goes. Even then, strategists, they understood that strategic edge that controlling the seas, it could provide. Thinkers like Themistocles, for example, they saw how a strong navy, it could protect their city-states, could bolster their economies, and even help them, project influence beyond their borders.
So even back then, it was about more than just like winning battles at sea. It was about using the sea to build a stronger, more influential nation.
Exactly. And much like today, those ancient Greek thinkers, they also wrestled with that constant tension, between land power and sea power.
Oh, yeah.
How do you balance the need for a strong army to defend your territory
Right.
with the need for a powerful navy to project your influence, across the waves? It's a question that has echoed through the ages.
It's true. And speaking of echoes through the ages, Germond, he doesn't linger in ancient Greece for too long, does he? He charts a course straight through history to the Age of Discovery. Now, that's when things really start to heat up on the high seas.
Yeah, you could say that's when that virtuous circle really starts spinning at full speed.
Okay.
Suddenly, sea power, it becomes deeply intertwined with exploration, colonization, and, the birth of global trade as we know it.
Okay, so we're talking countries sending out ships to, like, claim new lands, establish these vast trade networks, amass wealth and power.
Precisely. But it's not just about, brute force anymore. What makes this era so fascinating is this link between seafaring and the spread of ideas, particularly the ideas of liberalism.
Okay, so sailing the seas and spreading liberal ideas. How exactly are those two connected?
It's a two-way street, really. The principles of free trade and open markets that were taking root at the time, those are like pure liberalism, right? And they fueled this massive expansion onto the high seas. But here's the twist. The success of these maritime ventures, the wealth they generated, the global connections they forged, it actually reinforced those liberal ideas back home.
So it's like a feedback loop. Seafaring promotes liberal ideas, and those ideas then encourage even more seafaring.
Exactly. And it's during this period that we see the rise of not just powerful navies, but also these massive merchant fleets.
Right.
England's a prime example, a nation built on both naval strength and a thriving maritime economy. And here's where it gets really interesting. Germond's book, it isn't called Sea Power in the Age of Discovery.
Right.
It's called Sea Power in the postmodern world.
So is he suggesting that the golden age of sea power is over? That all those galleons and empires and, trade winds are just relics of the past?
Not quite. It's more nuanced than that. He's arguing that while the nature of sea power, it's changing, it's far from irrelevant. In fact, it's more complex and multifaceted than ever before.
All right, you've piqued my curiosity. What does sea power actually look like in this so-called postmodern world?
Well, for starters, there's a much, much greater emphasis on what we call soft power. And navies, they aren't just about battleships and cannons anymore.
I mean, it's not all about like who can sink whose ship the fastest anymore?
Not at all. Today, navies, they're tools of diplomacy, disaster relief, even scientific research.
Wow.
It's about building relationships, fostering cooperation, shaping global perceptions.
So less about might makes right and more about we're here to help. And by the way, Don't underestimate us.
Exactly. And while it's true that Western fleets have, shrunk in size since the end of the Cold War, Germond, he emphasizes their continued technological superiority and their collaborative approach.
Right, because it's not just about the quantity of ships, it's the quality. Who's crewing them, who they're working with.
Precisely. But here's another layer of complexity Germond throws into the mix: the rise of China. It's a fascinating case study in how old and new ways of thinking about sea power are kind of colliding in the 21st century.
Because on the one hand, they're, building up their navy at this incredible pace, new ships, new tech, the whole shebang. That seems like pretty modern to me.
It is, and it reflects China's, clear ambition to protect its maritime interests and project its power, particularly in its own backyard. But at the same time, they're also very active in things like international maritime law, positioning themselves as its partner in global trade.
Right.
All hallmarks of that postmodern approach we've been discussing.
So they're trying to, play both sides, flexing their military muscle while also talking about cooperation and global order.
In essence, yes. And that leads us to, I think, a really crucial question. Who really controls the oceans today? It's no longer as simple as just, looking at who has the biggest fleet or the most firepower.
Okay, now you've really got me hooked. This is where it gets really interesting.
See, Germond argues that this traditional idea of, one dominant naval power ruling the waves, it's becoming increasingly outdated. He introduces this fascinating concept of what he calls a solidaristic society of maritime nations.
Solidaristic society. So we're talking about shared values and cooperation, like a maritime club with its own set of rules.
That's a great way to put it, and it goes beyond just, military alliances. Germond argues that this solidaristic society, it's built on a foundation of shared economic interests, common security concerns, even cultural ties.
So who's in this maritime club? Who are the founding members, so to speak?
Think of it as primarily Western nations, with, the U.S. at the helm. They've got the largest fleets, the most advanced tech, and they're deeply invested in maintaining the current global order. An order that, let's be honest, has benefited them tremendously. But it's not just about, flexing military muscle. Germond, he emphasizes how this system relies on cooperation, intelligence sharing, even joint exercises between navies.
So it's like they're all working together to keep the seas open for business, make sure no one's causing too much trouble, no rogue waves out there.
Exactly. But this idea of a solidaristic society, it raises some, big questions too. Is it sustainable in the long run, especially with new players like China, rising in prominence? And can it really tackle those huge challenges facing our oceans? Things like piracy, environmental damage, overfishing.
You're right. Those are massive issues, and they go way beyond warships and traditional naval strategy.
Which brings us to another point Germond really drives home, the often overlooked impact of what he calls civilian sea power. It's not just about navies anymore.
Hold on. Civilian sea power. Okay, I need a definition here. What exactly does that mean?
Germond, he wants us to broaden our view. We can't just focus on military forces when we talk about influence on the seas.
Okay.
We have to consider the massive impact of civilian maritime activities. Think merchant shipping, fishing fleets, offshore energy, even those giant cruise ships.
Right.
These activities, they're the backbone of the global economy, but they also shape how we interact with and govern the oceans.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. So if you control the shipping routes, the fishing grounds, the undersea cables, that's a different kind of power, right? It's not about brute force. It's about controlling the flow of goods, resources, information.
Exactly. And Germond points to the rise of mega corporations like Maersk as a prime example. They control these huge fleets of cargo ships. They operate in ports worldwide, and they have this outsized impact on global trade. They might not have warships, but their influence on the seas is undeniable.
It's like the modern-day East India Company, but with container ships instead of those old-timey galleons.
That's a great analogy. And it highlights how civilian sea power can be leveraged, for economic gain, to exert political influence.
Yeah.
Germond even talks about port diplomacy, where countries invest in port infrastructure in other nations as a way to, gain a strategic foothold, build relationships.
So it's a subtler form of power projection, kind of like a long game on the geopolitical chessboard.
Precisely. But it's not all about, these corporate giants. Germond, he also highlights the importance of those smaller scale civilian activities like fishing.
Right.
And the role of coastal communities. They're vital to ocean governance, resource management, even maritime security. Think about it. Fishermen, they're often the first to spot, illegal activity out on the water.
That's true.
And coastal communities, they're on the front lines when it comes to things like pollution, rising sea levels.
They're like the eyes and ears of the oceans.
Yeah.
Even if they're not, sailing around in battleships.
Exactly. And Germond argues that grasping the significance of this civilian sea power is key if we want to actually solve the incredibly complex problems our oceans face today. It's not a simple equation anymore. It's about this intricate web of players, interests, activities that all have to be considered.
This is making me rethink everything I thought I knew about sea power. It's not just about military dominance. It's about economics, technology, cooperation, and the values we bring to the table.
And that's where Germond, he kind of leaves us with a final, incredibly thought-provoking question. He points out that while his book mainly focuses on how, technology has shaped sea power across history, there's another factor to consider: the role of ideas.
Ooh, I like where this is going. Hit me with it.
It's not so much a definitive answer as it is a question for all of us to consider. Could a shift in values, perhaps a greater focus on environmentalism or a push for stronger international cooperation, fundamentally change how we approach power on the sea?
Now, that's a really intriguing thought. I mean, today, a lot of the conversation around sea power still seems to revolve around competition, especially between, the U.S. and China.
Right.
What would happen if, those priorities shifted?
Imagine a world where, protecting marine ecosystems, battling climate change, these become the driving forces behind maritime strategy.
Yeah.
Imagine navies primarily focused on things like, enforcing environmental regulations, coordinating disaster relief, or even undertaking large-scale ocean cleanup.
It'd be a huge shift, but not totally outside the realm of possibility, right? We're already seeing more and more awareness of the environmental challenges facing our oceans, and growing pressure on, governments and corporations to take action.
Exactly. And if those concerns, they keep gaining momentum, they could absolutely reshape how we think about and exercise power at sea. We might see, new forms of international cooperation, groundbreaking technological innovations, maybe even new legal frameworks for governing the oceans.
So it's like that virtuous circle Germond talks about, but instead of being fueled by, wealth and military might, it's driven by sustainability, resilience, and protecting the health of the oceans for future generations.
That's the challenge Germond leaves us with, to think beyond those traditional ideas of sea power and consider how evolving values, along with these global challenges, might reshape the maritime landscape in the years to come.
Well, that's a lot to process, but it's also incredibly exciting. It makes you realize that the future of sea power, it isn't set in stone.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that, we can all play a role in shaping through our actions, through our choices.
Absolutely. That's what makes this whole topic so compelling. It's not just about, dry history or complex geopolitics. It's about understanding the forces that will shape our world in the future and recognizing the part we can all play in, steering those forces in a positive direction.
Well, there you have it. Your deep dive into the world of sea power, from the ancient Greeks to the postmodern era and beyond. We've covered a lot of ground today, but hopefully you're sailing away with a new understanding of just how crucial, how complex, and frankly, how fascinating this topic really is.
And maybe even a sense of inspiration to keep exploring that ever-evolving relationship between, humanity and the sea.
Until next time, keep those brainwaves churning and stay curious.